I know everybody now probably aware of what the Burkini issue and the coverage of the burkini all over the world, and banning a burkini in France and a few cities there, especially in Nice, and the picture of actually a French police with ugly uniform undressing a woman on a beach. It was the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It reminds me of a moral cop in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia, where they are actually enforce moral code on
Exactly.
on women. So I know that there is a legal issue there in France, banning the ban until they figure out what they need to do. It's so French, that they are confused about things. We have here Professor Heather Akou. She is a professor at Indiana University, specialized in actual custom, textile, African and Islamic dress specifically, and I think she's probably the most qualified person on the planet to talk about this. Before we start, Heather, if I might call you,
Sure.
uh, today is of all the ironic things. Today is Go Topless Day. Are you aware of that?
No, I didn't know
And you're
that.
not observing that day, by the way. I just
No, clearly not.
for the people who cannot see you. And so, how obviously, based on what their website is saying, this is an equal rights movement in about 50, 60 cities here in the United States
Right.
that try to raise the issue about treatment of women when it comes to dress. Why men have the right to go in public topless and women can't,
Right.
and so they go topless, and I'm all for that. That's everybody. Everybody have the rights to do that. But tell us a little bit. How did we go from it's all started, Adam and Eve, they only have the fig leaf. So how did we go from fig leaves to burkini? Take us through this development, the role of dress, functionality of it, and also symbolism of it through culture and through history.
Basically what my PhD is in.
Okay, yes, let's hear it.
Um, well, I mean, the concept of dressing the body is very old. I just actually ran across an article that they had been digging in Siberia and found a Denisovian site. So this is actually a group of human-like people who were before our species, and they already found evidence of needles that were used to sew clothing. So, doing something to your body is literally tens of thousands of years old. So, I have to imagine that basically that entire time people have used it as a way to control others because that's just what we do as human beings. Um, as far as swimwear goes, even Western swimwear until the mid 1900s, women were completely covered from neck down to their ankles. It was considered completely indecent. I mean, even on the street, women didn't show as much as their ankles. So to go swimming and to bear any more than that was just considered completely inappropriate. So it really was only in the mid 1900s.
And it was driven by, what is driven by the woman is the woman's body is taboo, or a woman's body is what was driven by religion or culture code? Why would woman have to cover her body?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty common theme, not only throughout Europe, but also the entire Mediterranean region.
Yeah,
Part of the reason people cover their bodies is just to deal with the environment because it's either really cold or really
yeah.
hot or really sunny. So there are lots of good physical reasons to.
But that was women and men.
Yeah, both women and men,
Okay.
honestly, until, the mid 1900s that started to change, at least in Europe. You still don't see much change really around much of the Mediterranean Middle East.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so mid 1900s things started to change in Europe. The 1920s was really the first time that women started to show their ankles and their lower legs. It was so scandalous.
Oh My
And then,
goodness.
then you started kind of hemlines dropped again in the 1930s. People were a little more conservative again, but 1940s, 1950s, the hemlines started to rise. 1960s and 70s was the era of the miniskirt, of nude theater, the musical Hair. That's when the whole concept of going nude on the beaches and having nudist colonies really took hold in a lot of places. But it's still, I mean, even within Europe, North America, Australia, the idea of going on a topless on a beaches, I mean, there's really, it's still not a terribly widespread phenomenon. Like in most of the world, it's just, people have some standards of you shouldn't show your entire body to everyone. Um, but in terms of swimwear, by certainly the 1960s, it had become mainstream in that specific venue for women to wear less clothing. So you started to get the one-piece suit, shows the entire leg, shows the entire arm, all that's covered is just the torso. And then even more, the bikini in the 1970s, so that you might cover as little as really only just, the nipples and whatever hair may or may not still be there, but really extremely tiny. In some places, that's considered completely mainstream, like Brazil, for example, is known for its very scant swimwear. And people don't think twice about it, is what I've been told. I've never been to Brazil. But I mean, for kind of mainstream Western fashion, like if you go to the pool in the United States, you see people wearing bikinis and Speedos and one-piece swimsuits, but you also see people wearing board shorts and surfing gear, t-shirts that cover more of their skin, often because people are sensitive to the sun and prefer to wear clothing rather than sunscreen. So actually, I would say in the US, there's gotten to be an increasing range of what people consider acceptable to wear to the pool. I don't think this is really all that much of an issue here. Everyone that I've talked with in the US
Yeah,
just thinks like, what is wrong with these people in France? Like,
yeah,
this is so
yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, how much of this, the history of woman clothing from, the Africans,
Mhm.
where, when the white settler went there, they were almost, naked and nude. And then they thought that was savage, and they, clothes play a role as a civilized symbol of the whites coming from Europe. And now it's the opposite. That, so what
It is.
happened in a transformation of Western culture? You went from nakedness and nudeness is a sign of savagery, and now it's a sign of freedom and liberty and all of that.
Well, it's not the first time that a country has tried to force people to take off clothes because of some moralistic issue. So laws were passed in Tunisia, in Iran, in Turkey, forbidding women to cover. That was very controversial. And then the opposite, of course, after the Iranian Revolution, there was a new law implemented that forced women to cover. I
Hmm.
mean, that's what I say is like we just like to make laws about what you can or can't cover. It's not really so much what is covered or how much or how little, but really just being able to force people to change what they're doing.
When you say force people, you talk about women. I mean, it seems like
Yeah,
historically man wants to control women through enforcing how much of her body should be covered or uncovered. I mean, you go that through laws, but also you go that through a culture of sexism and promotion and secularism and all of that. I mean, hardly can sell anything without showing a naked woman or almost naked woman.
right.
So how much of what getting into the bikini, not burkini, driven by commercial control and
As far as how bikinis became popular, though, I mean, it wasn't. I think people really overestimate the ability of commercial enterprises to force people
really,
to wear anything. Like, they can't force you to buy it or wear it.
Virginia's Secret is not powerful.
Oh, They have their lures, but
Yeah,
they can't make any laws. They can't literally force you to wear their product.
yeah,
People
no,
buy
no,
it
no, no,
because they
no.
want to.
That's the most powerful thing, that you convince people they are free by buying somebody's law or brand. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you're right that as far as forcing men, really the only laws I can think of that have ever been made concerning men's dress were actually sumptuary laws saying, "Oh, only the king can wear purple, nobody else can wear purple." Like those are the only things I know of that have ever applied to men. All the other laws have always been about women.
But the issue, Islamic dress, Islamic code, it wasn't really how much you cover your body, but as much as modesty. And I think men and women were asked or required to be modest. I mean, when you go to Saudi Arabia and whatever, I mean, almost men wearing a burqa, but you call it something
Right.
else, right?
Right.
So
Right.
why men are allowed to wear burqa on a French beach, not women? I mean, that's the issue.
Yeah, men essentially are.
Yeah.
Men can wear wetsuits and nobody thinks twice about it.
Exactly. To be honest with you, I'm not a fond of the Burke. I think the ugliest things I've ever seen on the beach, to be honest with you. And also the most hypocritic.
Hmm.
I mean, the idea of modesty is lost when it comes to burqa, because you show the curves and all of that. Other ugly things on the beach besides the speedo is also immense. Yeah. But anyway, what anything Islamic now is threatening for a Western. People are kicked out of aeroplane because they speak Arabic or they wear a hijab. And how much of this was going on the Nice beach there?
I've literally never heard of any terrorist attack that has occurred on a beach. So I don't is that the definition of a terrorist is someone who is literally threatening your life. Just wearing a particular kind of clothing is not threatening anyone's life. If you're trying to make a law about that, you are literally just trying to control them. There are, and I can say that there are very occasionally some safety concerns. That's why, for example, in the US, although there's a great premium placed on religious freedom, and certainly people have a lot more freedom to dress however they want, there are certain cases where, for example, women who cover their faces in many states can't get a driver's license unless they show their face in the photo. Or at least they have to show the person taking the photo who they are to prove that they really do deserve to have that identification, right? So, of course, there are some safety restrictions. I can even see why you might get worried about people who are wearing something that's so big that you really could hide something under there. But a burkini, like if you really have taken the time to see what that is, you can't hide anything under there. It's the same material as any other swimsuit. It's just covering more of the body. It's like a wetsuit with a slight dress attached to
I
it.
was alluding to the symbolism of it.
Right.
I mean, speaking Arabic is not really threatening on the airplane, but the symbolism of it. Okay, when the French say not just the law, not just the mayor of Nice, but also the public were saying that the Burkini is a threat to our way of life. What does that mean?
But I don't know. If you look at US history, for example, you can see all kinds of times when people have felt threatened about the way that minorities were dressed or their bodily appearance. That's why, Native Americans who had long hair, they'd be sent to boarding school and they would force them to cut their hair because how dare they continue to have that kind of bodily symbol of their culture. Or African Americans having afros. How many people, I've heard horrible stories. I saw this Facebook post the other day about this woman who talked about her grandmother who, this was, I think, like in the 1940s, had found some nail polish that her white employer threw out, and she painted her nails and wore it to church, and it was fine. But Monday, she had to go to the market, and the shopkeeper noticed her nails and was horrified and said, "Where did you get that nail polish? How dare you act like a white woman?" And actually pulled her fingernails out with a pliers.
That's a little bit drastic.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm not saying it's always that drastic, but why are we so concerned about how people are dressed? Like, as long as there is no literal safety concern, then we need to learn to just leave it alone.
Can we get along? But I know you might find that restriction from African American or in Tunisia. But
Mhm.
when we're talking about now, it's about power. When people, the West has the power, or the majority in French has the power over minority. That it makes difference. It's not like when Tunisia applied this. Tunisia never went and invaded another country or went to Africa, tried to
Oh, sure,
civilize them.
sure.
So also the issue of power, when the powerful always tell the lesser, what to do, what to wear, and what civilized, not civilized.
Yeah.
I think that's what it raises some flags. Who has the power to tell women what to wear? And especially if women of minority.
I mean, we're kind of at a critical moment. I mean, I'm certainly not a specialist in international law, but it seems like we're at a kind of critical moment. Are we going to continue to allow countries to enforce their power through these kinds of restrictions, or are we going to set down some real universal human rights? Because actually, the French law, the French Supreme Court just ruled that, in fact, one of the beaches in France is not allowed to have a restriction on the burkini. They have to stop that ban. And
Banning the ban.
yeah, they're banning the ban.
You make up your mind. Uh,
Right.
uh, I know. I mean, I'm sure this has been going on for a while, and it seems like the higher court in France wants to save the French from themselves. They always have good cop, bad cop kind of a deal. Let's talk about. I mean, not Muslims are not the only one wear a full closed body suits. The other non-Muslims are also for other purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it seems like only the whole attention is paid to Muslims and Muslim women and burkini that wear by Muslim, but also there is a lot of.
For sure. I mean, there are other groups in the US who wear more modest swimwear: Hasidic Jews, Mormons, conservative Christians.
and
It's, yeah, it's really not such a big deal.
and also there are some swimming pool that they devote certain days and hours for Hispanic women that they wear that modest clothing. Just and nothing wrong with that as long as it's not a public swimming pool.
Sure.
Let's end this. We'll talk about you've seen the Olympics, and you've seen the issue of that was raised during the beach volleyball, and how the contrast between burkini and bikini, and or burqa versus bikini, especially the game between the Egyptian team and the German team, and there was about also a lot of issues were raised about the rights of women and feminism and Islamophobia, and it seems to me the hypocrisy of feminism was showing at these things, that also that women have rights to wear whatever sport wears they want, as long they are professionally following.
Uh, well, I mean, to be honest, I didn't spend a lot of time following the Olympics because I had other things to do.
Yeah,
But
but the issue of
yeah,
dress was a
but
huge issue there.
But I'm really glad, in fact, that this issue came up with volleyball uniforms, because I have watched beach volleyball in the past and was really kind of horrified at what the teams were, in fact, required to wear. I'm
Yeah, it
just
was
like,
forced on them.
it was forced on them. I mean, so if you think about another sport that's, I mean, also in the Olympics, but let's say swimming. Swimwear in the Olympics has really fluctuated too. I mean, women have never worn as little as bikinis because it's just not practical. It can actually come off when you're really, diving, or like that's just
Yeah,
not a good
yeah,
idea,
yeah.
right? But there have been a couple of Olympics, like in Australia and Beijing, where people wore much more covering swimsuits. But the thing is, it actually had a practical advantage for them, particularly when they wore the suits that had polyurethane foam. It actually made them more buoyant in the water,
Mhm.
and they were able to break a lot of records. So now people who wore those swimsuits actually have a little star by their records noting, oh, this person wore one of those suits, which we no longer allow.
Mhm.
So I can see where for swimming, they do have to be careful about enforcing, what people are wearing, particularly for performance reasons. I mean, you still can wear, like, basically the regulations, unless you get some kind of exception, are that women do have to expose their shoulders, their entire leg. Men have to expose, I mean, pretty much the same parts. Actually, there's not a big difference between men's and women's swimwear anymore.
Mhm.
But you're not allowed to cover more than that unless you get some kind of exception. And they do make exceptions sometimes for religious reasons, for example. But the thing is that whatever swimsuit you propose to wear instead cannot give you a physical advantage,
I see what you mean.
right?
And as long as it's applying to everybody.
Yeah, the same applies to everyone. So, but for beach volleyball, I mean, I can't imagine what outfit would give you a performance advantage. So, I don't see why clothing in that particular sport should be an issue at all. I don't
Well,
know why that requirement was ever made.
well, it gives the advertisers advantage because
Sure.
it attracts millions of people. When you look at the volleyball, the regular volleyball, the six
Mhm.
against six, where people dress, short or whatever,
Right.
uh, virtually nobody watched that.
Is this is really a confusion about what the burkini is, in my opinion,
Mhm.
because if you actually know what the burkini is, you realize it really doesn't have that much of a relationship to the burqa.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
burqa covers the face, the burkini does not.
Mhm.
So the burkini does not violate the so-called burqa bans. And but because the name got confused, I mean, so the person who invented the burkini, Ahida Zanetti,
Mhm.
she came up with the term burkini, which is kind of catchy, and she also thought it was good because a burkini is a two-piece swimsuit, just like a bikini.
Mhm.
It just
Yes.
covered more of the body, right? But the
Yeah.
French are all confused because they're like, oh, it's another burqa. And in fact, I remember I've written a couple of articles about the burkini, and I remember there was a mayor in Italy who also decided to ban the burkini from municipal swimming pools, and he said he did it because a masked woman would scare children.
Not the nuns. Not the nuns.
Not the right, right. But the thing is that it's not a mask. Like the burkini does not include anything that covers the face,
Yeah, I see what you mean. You
right?
mean I know this issue is not gonna go away. And if it wasn't burkini, it's gonna be something else. And I think it exposed, if anything, exposed the hypocrisy that we have in the west and the east too. Because I don't think burkini is really lend itself to modesty. And I just read in Egypt today a resort in Sharm el Sheikh, wherever was banning burkini from their swimming pool. So
Right.
the French connection is gone, is catching up. But we have here Professor Heather Akou, and she is a professor of textile and African and Islamic dress, and she is in University of Indiana, and we brought her here on Sunday morning, and we thank you so much for giving us the time. And I'm sure
Pleasure.
everybody want a piece of you and ask you about this, but it's not going to go away, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
So thank you so much, Heather. We'll
Not
see you.
a-
Bye.
Okay.